Spectre Vision Radio.
Ever since I was a kid, I've always had a fascination with owls. Barn owls, to be precise. The kind that look like they have no facial features. That almost round white head, with two jet black eyes with their vacant yet simultaneously piercing stare. So expressionless. So strange. I've always found them somewhat unnerving, yet utterly compelling. My fascination with them led me to collect all things barn owl. Trinkets and figurines, paintings and photographs, and I even bought a taxidermied one off the internet. My therapist asked me about it one day, about why I thought it was that I was so mesmerized by them. And I found myself telling her something that seemed in no way connected to the question. I told her I had some odd memories from when I was a child. Ones I couldn't be sure weren't dreams, but that felt very much like they'd actually happened. Each memory began the same way, with me in bed waiting for sleep to come, the dark of the night sky visible through the gap between the blinds in my bedroom window. I'd suddenly hear my mother shouting at me from downstairs. Her voice panicked, forcefully telling me not to leave my room, to lock my door and wait for her to tell me that it was safe to come out again. Most important of all, she said, was that I not look out my bedroom window. The first dozen or so times it happened, the desperation in her voice got me to comply. But as kids are prone to do, there came a point when I disobeyed her. The usual routine started up, my mother shouting from downstairs. But this time, I did go to the window and look out. When I did, I saw a woman standing on the porch. She was tall, dark hair pulled back tight, wearing a plain black dress. From that angle, I couldn't get a good enough look at her face to properly discern her features. I watched as she slowly approached the front door and just stood in front of it, utterly motionless for a while. She then made her way around the house, peering into each window. Movements so strangely slow, almost disconcertingly calm. Was this woman what my mother was so terrified of? Was this what she didn't want me seeing? That's what I found myself telling my therapist. She'd asked me about my fascination with owls, and I'd told her that. We sat in silence for a while, until my therapist asked me why I'd said these memories might really have been dreams. I couldn't help but laugh, and admitted I'd left something out of my retelling. The reason I can't be sure they're real memories, I said, is because when I try to picture that woman making her way around the house, peering into the windows, her feet aren't touching the ground. My therapist looked a little puzzled and beckoned me to elaborate. I told her that it seemed as if the woman was gliding. Her feet were obscured by the bottom of her long dress, but she seemed to hover a few inches off the ground. And when she moved, nothing about her changed shape. She didn't appear to be walking. She seemed to be, very slowly, floating. My therapist nodded but didn't offer any insight. I asked her if there was a link, why I'd felt the need to tell her that when all she'd done was ask me about my obsession with owls. She said she wasn't sure, but suggested I ask my mother about these incidents, about the woman. Normally, my mother insisted on coming to visit me, but it had become more and more difficult for her as the years steadily took their toll, so I decided to drive up to see her instead, and to ask her about my strange memories while I was there. When I arrived, I walked up to the front door, bag in tow, and knocked. No answer. I waited, but nothing stirred, so I made my way along the porch to the window that looked directly into the living room and peered inside. My mother was in there. She was even staring right at me. She didn't look surprised to see me. She looked disappointed, I thought. I asked her to let me in, and eventually she complied, groaning as she got up, noticeably less mobile than when I'd last seen her. She asked me what I was doing, and shook her head and sighed when I said I'd driven up to spend the weekend with her. "I wish you would have phoned ahead," she said. "I would have told you not to come. You know I prefer to come see you." Her behavior was odd, but that wasn't exactly out of step. She'd always been a good mother, I thought, but she wasn't exactly what people call normal. I spent the day doing chores around the house, trying to lighten her load. She'd stare at me now and again, but when I asked her what was wrong, she just kept saying she wished I'd called ahead. When we sat down to dinner that evening, one which I accompanied with a couple glasses of wine, I felt ready to ask her about the events in question. She squirmed in her chair as I retold what I divulged to my therapist. Her shouting for me to stay in my room, to not look out the window, the woman outside the house. I even managed to say that, in my recollection, the woman's feet never touched the ground. Mother stopped squirming when it became clear I was done. We sat unspeaking for a while, scored only by the loud ticking of the antique grandfather clock she kept in the dining room. When she started to explain, the words came slowly, scattered and unfocused. She said what I was remembering was that she had a distant relative who'd gone crazy and terrorized us for a few years. I asked what this woman's name was and if she was still alive, but my mother refused to answer either of those questions, saying she didn't want me digging up things she'd rather keep buried. I could tell she was legitimately frightened of what she was recalling, but also that she was lying somehow. I pressed her, but she stonewalled me. "That's as much as I care to talk about it," she said. That night, as I was getting ready to have a shower before bed, I couldn't find any towels in the place I remembered them being kept. The door to my mother's bedroom was open, and the light was on inside, so I went to ask her where they were. As I stepped close enough to the door so that I could see past its right angle and into her room, I was confronted with the image of my mother getting changed into her bedclothes. She didn't realize I was there, hadn't heard me approaching. The only reason I didn't turn around and give her some privacy is that I was stunned by what I saw. Most of her body was covered in strange scars. They were all very straight, like they'd been made with something incredibly sharp. Was she sick? Had she been keeping the true extent of her failing health from me? Whatever it was, I knew it wasn't a conversation to ambush her with just before bed. I turned around and headed to my room, deciding I could go without a shower for one night. A short while later, my mother came to check on me, before turning in herself. I wanted to ask about the scars, but forced myself to hold my tongue, knowing it'd be better left for the morning. Even though I was already in bed reading, she asked me if I wouldn't be more comfortable at a hotel. I assured her I was fine, and she offered me a rueful smile before wishing me a good night's sleep and retiring to her room. As I lay in the dark, in my old bed, in my old room, I realized I'd forgotten about all the noises an old house like that can make. The creaks and cracks. When you're not used to it anymore, it continuously sounds as if someone is approaching, as if someone might be coming up the staircase. After laying there for around an hour, I started to get reaccustomed to them. But just when I felt my mind wandering over the precipice of sleep, my ear tuned in to a noise different than the rest. It was coming from beyond my closed bedroom door. At first I thought it sounded like scratching, maybe a tree branch against the glass of a window. No, that wasn't right. I concentrated. The sound was rhythmic, almost like the patter of quick, light footsteps. Unable to leave it alone, I slowly got out of bed and quietly as I could, made my way over to the bedroom door. When I gently opened it, the source of the noise was immediately clear. A barn owl had somehow gotten into the house, and the scratching noise I heard were its talons hitting the floorboards as it scampered around, searching for an exit. I stood transfixed for a moment, just watching it, until it took flight and shot over to the stairs to the attic, and then disappeared up into it. My mother opened her bedroom door and asked me what was going on. I told her an owl had gotten into the house and had flown into the attic. I told her to go back to bed, that I'd get up there and take care of it. "That's not an owl," she said. I ignored her and climbed the stairs. When I got up into the attic, I wasn't surprised to find the light didn't work, but there was enough bluish moonlight cascading in through the blindless window to make out what was in front of me. I doubted my mother had been up there in years. The place was awash with cobwebs and dust, neglected boxes of long-forgotten photographs. I went over to the window and opened it as wide as I could, then stood still, trying to tune my hearing, trying to locate the owl so I could shoo it out into the night. But there was only silence. Wherever it was doing an extremely good job of keeping very, very quiet. The hush was broken by my mother shouting up from the bottom of the stairs. "Please, go back to your room and stay there until I say so." I called down to her, telling her I was just trying to shoo the owl out of the window so we could both go back to sleep. That remark was met with a long, grim pause. "You opened the window?" she said, this time barely loud enough for me to hear, voice rattled and quivering with fear. I scanned the attic, making a little circle on the spot. And that's when I saw it. A figure, standing in the corner of the room, silhouette just bleeding out from the darkness. I took a tentative step forward, and my eyes adjusted. It was the woman I'd remembered from when I was a child, the one I'd seen peering into the windows, the one my mother was so afraid of. And her feet were not touching the ground. The hem of her long dress hung about 10 inches above the floorboards. I squinted, trying to make out her features now she was so close. I couldn't, but it wasn't because of the darkness, and I realized that it hadn't been the distance or the angle when I'd seen her from my bedroom window as a child that meant I couldn't remember her face. It was because she had no features. Her face was a blank, white canvas. No nose, no mouth, marked only by 2 tiny, marble-like eyes, like the face of a barn owl. I felt every muscle in my body clench. Paralyzed with fear, she began to glide, very, very slowly, towards me. My memory of what happened next is non-existent. One minute, I was standing in the attic, staring into that terrifying face as it got closer. And the next, I was standing on the porch in broad daylight. When I made my way back into the house, I found my mother at the kitchen table, looking as if she'd been waiting for me. I took a seat opposite her. I was so confused that I wasn't able to formulate any questions. So I just waited for her to speak instead. I protected you from it as long as I could, she said. What happens now? I asked. You learn to live with it, she replied.